be able to come to speak to all of you. This is a place where I've had great happiness here. I've had the opportunity to perform Brit Milah right up here front. And as the Rav mentioned, my son as well. So I thank Rabbi Babayev and the Bukharian Jewish Community Center for inviting me. And I hope that on this great night of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is the month of Hanukkah, the month of great happiness, that we will be able to be inspired together as we speak about the great tzaddik, Chacham, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. I would like to begin by telling you a Gemara. The Gemara is in Broches Davov Amud Beis, and the Gemara tells us as follows: Agra dehespeda deluye. The reward that somebody gets when they give a eulogy, when they speak about somebody who passed away, deluye, is when they make people cry. When somebody cries that a tzaddik has passed away, and it has an effect on him because he cries and he realizes how sad it is that a tzaddik leaves this world. When the person gives such a hesped, such a eulogy, that's the right thing. Then he gets a high reward. However, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, the great Rosh Yeshiva who started the Lakewood Yeshiva, once said that we can understand this Gemara with a different meaning. The word deluye comes from the word deli. Deli is a pail. A pail, when you want to get water from a well, you take a pail and you bring out the water. And he said like this: Agra, the reward of when somebody gives a hesped, somebody gives a eulogy on a great tzaddik, deluye is when he brings out from the tzaddik the great things that he did so that we can all learn from him. It's not only a question of crying, it is a question of learning about the life of the great tzaddik. And just like we take a pail and we bring the water out, we bring out all the great things of the great tzaddik so that we could learn from them. I'll tell you a fascinating Gemara. The Gemara tells us that right before Rav was about to pass away, this Gemara is in Shabbos Daf Kuf Nun Gimel. It tells us that Rav said to all the Talmidim, he said, Achim behespeda, make sure that you give me a warm and a very fine eulogy. Speak nicely about me. You know why he said? The Hosam ka'imna, because I'm going to be standing there. What does that mean? That the rabbi said to his Talmidim, to his students, give me a warm hesped because I'm standing there. What does that mean? That he's going to be there and that he can hear? That's the simple meaning. That when a person dies and he is at his own funeral, he can hear what they're saying. That's the simple meaning. That's what he said. But there's a much deeper meaning. You know what the Rav really meant? The Etz Yosef tells us. Every day that we do mitzvot, every day that we learn Torah, every day that we do chesed, our neshama goes higher and higher and higher. But when a person dies, that's the level that he stands on. He can't get any higher. How can our neshama get higher? You know how our neshama can get higher after a person dies? If people learn from this person, and they do good things because of him, then the neshama gets higher and higher. And that's what Rav said. Rav said, give me a good hesped. Talk about the good things that I did, because I'm standing there. I can't get any higher. How am I going to get higher? How's my neshama going to get higher? But if you say good things about me, then people will learn from me. And then they will do things because I did them, then I will get higher and higher and higher. Otherwise, I'm just standing there. And tonight, when we come to hear about Chacham, Ovadia Yosef, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, we are doing two things. not only are we doing something for ourselves because we will learn how to change and how to grow, but if we change, as the Rav said, as the gentleman who introduced the evening said, if we grow, then we are helping the neshama of Rabbi Chacham Ovadia Yosef to get higher and higher and higher, because otherwise he's just standing at the level that he reached. And every tzaddik wants to get higher and higher. So tonight, we have come together for two reasons. Not only to talk about the great tzaddik and see what we can learn, but what can we do to make sure that his neshama should get higher. One thing is for sure. There are those that say that since the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, there has never, ever been a funeral so big as the one as for Chacham Ovadia Yosef. Whether it was 850,000 or 1 million. In Eretz Yisrael, there are only 7 million people. That means more than 10% of the country came to the funeral. Since the time of Moshe Rabbeinu and Aharon HaKohen, when the whole Klal Yisrael was there has never, ever been a funeral like this. What was so special about this person? That not only Ashkenazi, not only Sephardi, not only religious, not only everybody felt they wanted to come. From the government to the grocery store man. For every man, every woman, every girl, every boy, yeshivas, Beis Yaakovs, everybody came. Why? Why did they come? What was so special about this great person? And I think because there were 4 or 5 things that defined this great tzaddik. The thing that defined him more than anything else was his love of Torah. He studied Torah every second that he possibly could, and this was so even when he was a child. He hardly ever went out for recess. He always stayed and he studied over and over and over. But as he grew older, you know what his main love was? Not only his learning, but to make sure that every one of us would learn. And every one of us would make sure that our children learn Torah. And we will hear stories how he did that in a moment. And not only that, he loved Klal Yisrael, and more than anything else, he loved Sephardic Jews. Because he knew in his heart that in Israel and all over the world, the Sephardic Jew many times was looked at as a second-class citizen. And he was going to change it, and he did change it. And he made sure that the Sephardi Jew in Israel could walk with pride, could be a big Talmid Chacham, could have the most gorgeous shuls. Where do you have a shul like this? This is what the Beis HaMikdash is going to look like. This is part of Rav Chacham Ovadia Yosef gave us the pride to build a shul like this. The pride that our children should go to yeshivot, and that our girls should go to Beis Yaakovs, and they should be high, upstanding people of high status, all Sephardim together. That's what he loved more than anything else. And you know what he used to do when he was a rabbi? When he was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, or the chief rabbi of Israel? Every day, if he could, especially in the time of Rishum. Rishum means registration. And he would go from city to city to city. And he would take a bus and he would go to the little towns and the kibbutzim. This was a great rabbi, a great tzaddik. He would knock on the door. Are you going to send your child to a religious school? Come with me. Here's the registration form. Let's go to the school and let's make sure that your child is registered in a religious school. He didn't have to do that. He was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. He was the chief rabbi of the country. Had 100 people who could have done that for him. But he went from every city to every city, knocking on doors in kibbutzim, moshavim, in apartment houses, in private houses. Come, let's fill out the forms. You know what he used to do? He used to go to graduations of the 8th grade. 8th grade graduations, and he would speak. He didn't have to speak for 8th grade kids, but he wanted to tell them, you're going out of the 8th grade, go into a Jewish high school, go to a religious high school, make sure that you have the right environment to learn Torah. And he understood that if the children are going to learn Torah, then the parents are going to learn Torah as well. And you know something? He was such a natural person. You could talk to him, he would get up, he would tell stories, he would tell jokes. He never asked you how religious you were. It didn't make a difference because he loved every Jew no matter how religious they were. And if they weren't religious, he said, listen, the main thing is your kids. Send your kids to a place where they're going to learn Torah, because he understood if a child comes home and tells the mother that we learned about lighting candles Friday night, the mother's going to light candles. And he understood that if a little boy comes home and said that we can only eat something that has a certain level of kashrut, after a while the parents are going to be observing the kashrut. That's what he did all over, from the northern part of Israel to the southern part of Israel. And you know what that reminds me of? And that's the first lesson that we could learn. Everybody, many of you certainly know of Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Samuel. You know who his mother was? Who was his mother? Does anybody know? Hannah. She didn't have children for a very long time. And Elkanah, her husband, had two wives, Penina and Hannah. And you know what the Medrash tells us? This is the first Yalkut Shmaini in Shmuel Aleph Aleph, and it tells us as follows. This was before the first Beis HaMikdash was built. They used to go to Mishkan Shiloh. And Elkanah had a Winnebago, big travel truck, right? And he took his family. And the Gemara and the Medrash tells us, every year when he went to Mishkan Shiloh, he went on a different route. One year he went Route 95. Other time he went on Route 80. Other time he took Route 1. And he went every year. He went before the holidays. He went on a different route. And people would say, where are you going with your family, Elkanah? He said, come with us. Come with us, we're going to see the Kohanim in Mishkan Shiloh. We're going to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You'll see how the Kohanim are davening, how they're praying, how they're doing all the inspirational tefillot in the Mishkan Shiloh. And you know why he went every time a different way? Just like Ovadia Yosef. Because he wanted to get everybody, not only the people on this route, the people on that route, every year a different route. Just that's what Ovadia Yosef did. And you know what happened? Hashem says to Elkanah, because you are interested in making other Jews be inspired, I'm going to give you the greatest child of all. I'll give you Shmuel Hanavi. So that's what the Medrash tells us. The Medrash tells us, Holamarata shebeschar Elkanah. The reward of what Elkanah did, that's how he got Shmuel. Every one of us here wants to have wonderful children. And you want to have wonderful grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You know how to do it? Like Elkanah did. Go out and try to be Mekarev. There's not one person here tonight who doesn't have a second or a third cousin that's not religious. You know what you got to do tonight? When you get home, take out your telephone book and give a call to your third cousin or second cousin. Say, you know, we're making a Hanukkah party. Why don't you come? Why don't you join us? Don't tell them you want them to light candles. Don't tell them you want to make them to be religious. Come, join the party. It'll be very nice. And then when they're there, you could give them some candles, give them some oil, give them some latkes, give them some Russian food, which I don't know, you know how to pronounce it. You give them all the good stuff, right? Lahmajanis, that's by the Persians, not by you, right? But whatever you're going to give them, then they're going to see what a family is. Then they're going to say, wow, this is a religious group. I should be like that. And they're going to go home and maybe they'll say Shema Yisrael. And that's the first lesson that we learned tonight. Just like Chacham Ovadia Yosef went from city to city to make sure that little kids go to yeshiva, that's what you got to do. You got to call your cousins that are not religious, and your neighbors, and your co-workers, and tell them, join us for Shabbat, join us for Hanukkah. Come, see what a religious family is all about. See that we live such a good life, we're all happy. Everybody's smiling here, look at that, isn't that amazing? Everybody's happy. Why? Because we know we're doing the right thing. And that's what Chacham Ovadia did, and that's the first thing that we have to learn. I'll tell you an amazing thing. One of the things that he always used to say was, always talk softly. With soft language, he said, every Jew has a spark, a fire of Yiddishkeit in them. It's a little spark. But if you talk nicely, and you don't yell, and you don't scream, you're going to be able to make that little spark into a fire. And that's why anytime you spoke to Chacham Ovadia Yosef, he had a smile. never yelling, never screaming. And that's the second lesson that we have to learn. There are a lot of people here always yelling. Yelling at their wives, yelling at their husbands, yelling at their kids. And you know what happens? Rav Matis Yoel Solomon once said, you know what happens when you yell at your kids at the table every time you're always yelling? They don't become dropouts, they become pushouts. Because you're pushing them. You don't want to be yelled at. So don't yell just because you're the father or you're the mother. It doesn't give you the right to yell at your kids. And it doesn't give you the right to yell at your husband or your wife. You might get what you want if you yell, but they'll hate you for it. But you want to be loved. You have to speak softly. That's what Rabbi Ovadia used to say, Drachea darkei noam, v'chol nesivoseh shalom. The ways of Hashem are peaceful. Now, I don't know what the rabbi said. I know two things that he said, Pesach Krohn and Aaron HaKohen. That's all I know. But one of the things that he said, Aaron HaKohen, was Ohev Shalom v'roidev Shalom. How do you make peace? Talking softly. And that's what Rabbi Ovadia did. And that's what we have to learn. You know, I want to tell you a great story about Chacham Ovadia Yosef. This story happened on Yom Kippur, right after the Yom Kippur War. Right after the Yom Kippur War, there were many soldiers that had been killed. Over 2,000 soldiers. And 900 wives had no proof that their husbands were killed. And how are they going to get remarried? They are called agunot. Agunot means they're tied up. Because if there's no proof that the husband died, how are they going to get married? No rabbi would marry them. And you know what Chacham Ovadia Yosef did? He said, I'm going to find a heter for them. I'm going to make sure that they'll be able to get married. And he looked into each case, and every woman who had a husband who was in the war and didn't come back would come and cry to Chacham Ovadia. And he would say, give me some proof, anything. And sometimes there was an identity tag, or sometimes there was a photograph, whatever it was. He made sure that they would be able to get remarried. All the rabbis were afraid. How could you let somebody get married? Maybe the husband ran away. Maybe he's got sick someplace and he's mentally ill and he's going to come back in 2 years and she'll be married to somebody else and it could be that it'll be mamzer. That would be terrible. But he was not afraid. He was courageous. Why? Because he loved Jews. So listen to this story. You won't believe this story. There was, you see, in the Jewish newspapers, in the Israeli papers, I should say, the secular writers, they didn't like Chacham Ovadia Yosef. You know why? Because he always criticized their schools. He said, you got to go to a religious school. You got to go to a school that's dati. So there was one marshas, one lady Rocha. She was an Israeli newspaper writer. She said, I'm going to get Chacham Yosef. So you know what she did? You wouldn't believe. She went and she interviewed so many of these women who Chacham Ovadia Yosef said they could get married. And she said, I'm a newspaper writer. Tell me, what did you tell him? And some said there was identity tag, some said there was a photo, some said there were witnesses. And she decided that she's going to come with a few people, all planned out, and she's going to tell Chacham Ovadia Yosef, you know, I had a husband, he was in the army, and he was killed, and I want to get married. And really, her husband was in the office, in the newspaper office, waiting. But how could Chacham Ovadia Yosef know that, right? And she brings the witnesses, and she brings the proof, and she's crying. Hey, I want to get married. You know, my husband died, and I got proof, and here's the witnesses. And Chacham Ovadia Yosef listens, and he says, you're right. Now you can get married. And he gives her a petek, he gives her a piece of paper, and signs, you can get married. Well, she was so happy. She runs out of there. And this was many years ago before cell phones. And she calls her husband in the office because he's in the newspaper office waiting, because now she's going to say, oh, you see, Chacham Ovadia Yosef, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And she calls in the office and she says, I want to speak to my husband. And the guy on the phone starts crying. She says, what's wrong? He says, we just got a bit of news. Your husband was killed in a car crash about 10 minutes ago. So the moment Chacham Ovadia Yosef said that she could get married, her husband was dead. You see how Hashem takes care of the tzaddikim? It's unbelievable. She was going to make a ploy against Chacham Ovadia Yosef, and Hashem said, I'll take care of you. You can get married. Now you can get married. That was because of the Avas Yisrael that Chacham had, and the Avas Hashem, and the way you see how Hashem loved him as well. I'll tell you another thing about Chacham Yosef that we could learn. Not only to make sure that every Jewish child has a Jewish education, and not only the Avas Yisrael as he had, but he never wasted a moment. Never wasted a moment. He was always with a sefer, always learning. He had 11 kids. Anybody here have 11 kids? So even if you have 7 or 5 or 4, whatever you got, Friday night when you come home from the synagogue, right, you come home from shul, till you make kiddush, till all the kids sit down, everybody's arguing, where to sit, what is it, how come I didn't get a plate, how come I didn't get a, everybody knows, right? You know what he did? 11 kids, right? Had a sefer, waited till his wife Margalit, got everybody quiet, and meanwhile he was studying and he was learning. Eventually they're going to sit down, right? They're also hungry, right? They also want to sing Shalom Aleichem. So he didn't waste a minute. So I'll tell you what happened. He lived in a neighborhood called Har Nof, on Rehov HaKablan. It's a big apartment building. If you've ever been to Har Nof, many, many Jews live in that neighborhood. So there was one lady, not religious, she was the head of the co-op board. Everybody, these ladies that are the head of the co-op board. They give everybody tzorot, right? So we all have them. So in that building, she was the manager. She was the main one. One afternoon, she decides, we got to have a meeting. All the tenants got to come down to the meeting. So everybody goes, she goes to all the houses. She sends out notes, puts up notes in the elevator, or whatever, in the stairwells. All the tenants got to come. 8 o'clock in the evening, everybody's there. Not the Chacham. He's busy learning. Somebody else walks in. She says, who are you? I am the shliach. I am the representative of the Chacham. He's busy studying Torah, and he gave me proxy. Whatever I decide, he's okay with it. Let's start the meeting. She said, no. He's got to be here. Every tenant has to be here. He said, but he's a big tzaddik. He's learning Torah. Every second counts. How could you make a big tzaddik, one of the greatest tzaddikim in Eretz Yisrael? He's learning Torah. He's got to be here. Okay. The man goes back to the Chacham. He says, okay, I'll come. He comes to the meeting. He's there an hour. Hashem Yerachem. He had to waste an hour. He goes back up, and the meeting is closed. Right? It's finished. The lady wants to get out of her seat. She can't move. Her right foot is paralyzed. She can't believe it. She starts screaming, my foot is paralyzed. They come, they can't believe it. She can't move her foot. And then, of course, she says, oh, Hashem Yirachem, I know why it happened. I know why it happened. Because I wasted the time of that tzaddik. And she starts crying. How am I going to I can't move. I can't get out of the chair. Somebody said, you should ask him for mechila. Send somebody up in your name and ask him for mechila. They went upstairs. They asked the Rav for mechila. The Rav said, tell her I forgive her. He came down, and she got up out of the chair, and she walked out of the meeting. Did you believe that? That's when Hashem loves you. When Hashem understands that you don't waste a minute of Torah. Hashem showed that lady, what does it mean you don't waste the time of a tzaddik? I want to tell you a story, you're not going to believe this. And I'm happy to tell the story because it has to do with a bris. You won't believe this. Maybe you had a boy, she's calling from the hospital, I'll be happy to do the bris. Okay, no, it's a girl. Okay. That lady that was walking around with that thing, I don't know what they were walking, I thought it was a baby in there. I got a one-track mind. Listen to this. I just heard this story from Rabbi Faskowitz. You won't believe this. Rabbi Faskowitz, who's the Rosh Hashiva Madrega Sa'odam. He said, in Har Nof, there was a person who lived not far from Chacham Ovadia Yosef. He lived on 45 Rehov HaKablan. And Nebuch, this person, in his house, he had a fire. Terrible. And he was not a wealthy man, and he needed $50,000 to repair the house, to repair the apartment. So he comes down to Chacham Ovadia Yosef, and he says, Rebbe, maybe you could help me. Now, the Chacham didn't have $50,000 to give him, but he said, let's figure it out. Let's see what's doing. Maybe we could raise some money. All of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. A wealthy man comes in, and he says, Chacham, you know, you've been the sandak for some of my grandsons before. Now we had a new baby, Mazal Tov. Could the Rav be the sandak? Where's the bris? In Bnei Brak. Oh. Chacham said, I have a new policy. I don't leave Yerushalayim. You want to bring the baby to me here on Yerushalayim? I'll be happy to be sandak. But I cannot give up 4 hours to go to Bnei Brak in traffic and come back. And all the time I'm not going to be able to be learning. I don't do that anymore. I used to do it. I cannot do it. I need every second of time. Chacham, I'll give you anything, please. He says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I cannot give up time from learning. It is very important. I am writing tshuvot. Okay, Chacham, I'm so sorry. We would have loved to have you. And he's about to walk out. And then all of a sudden, Chacham says, wait a second. Wait a second. I just came up with an idea. If you give $50,000 to my friend over here because he had a fire in his house, in his apartment, I will come to be sandak. The wealthy man can't believe it. He says to the fellow, what's your name? And he takes out a checkbook and he writes a check for $50,000. And he gives it to this man. So the Chacham says, Mazal Tov, I'll be able to come. And listen what the man does. He takes the check and he rips it up. Chacham says, what are you doing? He says, because of me, you're going to lose 4 hours of learning? It's not worth it. I'm not going to take it. Could you believe a man ripped up a check of $50,000 because he knows what learning is to Chacham Ovadia Yosef, and he didn't take the money. And I'll tell you what happened. It's amazing. Let's say this guy's name was Nisim, right? A good Sephardi name, right? So Nisim, so he says, Rabbi, what should I do now? You know, he gave up 50 grand. He says, listen to me. You know, there's a new area that's starting in Ramat Beit Shemesh. This was many years ago. Sell your apartment in Hanof. Even with the fire, it's worth a lot of money. You'll be able to buy a nice apartment in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And you'll see, everything will be good for you. You will not believe this. That's exactly what the guy did. The guy came to Ramat Beit Shemesh. He was looking around for a Sephardi minyan. He couldn't find one. He walks in the street. He sees one guy, a Sephardi fellow. He says, excuse me, you know, I just moved here. There's no Sephardi minyan? He says, no. And they get to talking. He says, you know, I would love to build a shul in the name of my father. That's what Nisim says. So the other fellow says to him, Nisim, where you come from? He says, I'm from Morocco. He says, Morocco? What's your last name? And he tells him whatever his name is, whatever, a good Moroccan name. He says, what are you talking about? Are you the son of the grocer from Morocco? He says, yeah, how do you know? He says, I don't believe it. Your father was such a tzaddik. When my family was growing up, we had no money. And your father, the grocer, gave us so much credit. You know what? Today I'm a wealthy man. I'm going to build a shul in the name of your father right here in Ramat Beit Shemesh. And that's what he did. Chacham Ovadia Yosef gave him an idea. He should move to Ramat Beit Shemesh. And Hashem makes it that the grocer, that's his son. And this is the guy who the grocer helped. That's what happens when you're a big tzaddik. Hashem makes all these wonderful things happen. Only because Hashem loved him as well. Now I want to tell you an amazing thing. You know, recently, of course in Israel, there was a new party that was started in 1984. And that party, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef gave it the most brilliant name. You know what the name was? Shas. Now, I always thought Shas stands for, learning Shas, right? Daf Yomi, Shas. That's not what it stands for. It stands for Shomer Sephardim. That's really what it stands for. I couldn't believe it. I didn't know that until I did research for this organization, for this speech. I used to think Shas, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef wants everybody to learn Shas. That's, of course he wants, but that's the brilliance. It has a double meaning. Shomer Sephardim. And you know what Rabbi Ovadia said? Rabbi Ovadia said, I want to bring the crown back to its glory. Lahachzir atara liyoshna. The great Sephardi tzaddikim, the Rambam, Beis Yosef, all the great tzaddikim, the Rif. I'm going to make sure that the Sephardim feel pride. I'm going to make sure that we are going to be first-class citizens. Whether we are Yemenites, whether we are Bukharians, whether we are Iran, Iraq, Morocco, Syria, Persia, it made no difference. And he said, but you know what? We are all going to follow the halachot of the Beis Yosef. Because Maran, the Beis Yosef, he was the one that established what the law should be in Eretz Yisrael. Now you had a lot of people arguing with him. Because the Yemenites said, hey, we got this custom. And the Moroccan said, yeah, we got this custom. And the Persian said, you know, we got this custom. And he said, in Eretz Yisrael, we're all together. All one custom. We are all Sephardim. And because he went and he convinced all the Rabbanim that they have to be together, hundreds of mikvahs were built. Thousands of children became religious. And millions of dollars of Sephardic money went not to Ashkenazi schools, to Sephardi schools. Doesn't mean you shouldn't support an Ashkenazi school. It doesn't hurt. But I'm saying, but he gave them pride. He made them feel special. Because we are all Talmidim of the Beis Yosef. And it's amazing to me. You know, Yosef is a great name for tzaddikim in the Sephardic families. The Beis Yosef, the Chidas, Chaim Yosef David Azulai, that's also Yosef. The Ben Ish Chai was Yosef Chaim, and Ovadia Yosef. And you know something? You know why? Because Yosef means more. Never being satisfied with the status quo. I once heard Rav Chanoich Ehrenreich say a fabulous word. He said this once at the Aguda convention. And he said, when Yaakov had Yosef, he said, now shalcheni ve'elchi, now I can go out. What do you mean, now he could go out and face the world? Why should he be able to go out and face the world? But he had Yehuda. Malchus comes from Yehuda, Yisachar. Yisachar was all learning. And Shimon, all the Rabbeim, all the teachers come from Shimon. What's so special about Yosef that now he feels that he could face the world? You know why? The answer is because Yosef means more. Never being satisfied with the status quo. More, higher. We have to be Yosef Jews. We come to learn tonight from Chacham Ovadia Yosef because he was never satisfied with anything that he accomplished. Always higher and higher. But you know why there were also another 100,000 people at the funeral of Chacham Ovadia Yosef? I read it. I had no idea. I didn't know. I'm so grateful that I had to prepare because I'm a real Ashkenazi. I knew very little about Chacham Ovadia Yosef. I met him once. I'll tell you in a few moments what I learned from him when I met him. But, you know, there was an article that was written recently by a rabbi from Kiryat Gat. He has an Ethiopian community. And he said, you know, that the Ethiopian communities, you know when they came? If you remember, in 1984, there was something called Operation Moses. 8,000 Ethiopian Jews came from Sudan. They came by an airline called TEA, Trans-European Airlines. Doesn't exist anymore. But they used to take a lot of Muslims to Mecca. And they were always traveling in those Arab areas. So the Sudanese government, for whatever reason, once the Israeli government asked them to do it secretly, then they said, okay, we'll let the Jews go out. Why did they do it? You know why? Because Chacham Ovadia Yosef said the Ethiopians, they're Jews. And he felt that they were Jews like everybody else. And all the Ethiopians, every single one of them, today feels a pride. You know why we are considered Jewish? A lot of people didn't consider them Jewish. They wanted them to go through a gerut. But Chacham Ovadia Yosef said, I'm going to make sure that you're going to feel special. Now, I have a brother-in-law. His name is Rabbi Shaul Dollinger. He lives in Ashdod. I've been in that school many, many times. Kiryat Chinuch Labanim. You have to see those Ethiopian kids with the little peyot. So sincere. Such the way they pray and the way they learn and the way they study. Such holy children. They're only there because Chacham Ovadia Yosef said they're Jewish. And if they had to go through a conversion, he made sure that the conversion was considered proper so that they would be first-class citizens. Now, of course, many times a person will look at an Ethiopian and will not give them first-class status. But today, in their hearts, they feel special. Hopefully, they'll become part of the society. Now, after a while, the Arab countries made Sudan stop. So for 7 weeks, they were able to bring in 8,000 people, but then it resumed again in 1991, and another 14,000 Ethiopian. You know how many Ethiopian Jews there are today? You would never believe. You know how many Ethiopian Jews there are in Eretz Yisrael? Over 120,000. One man made the difference. One man, because he said, and because he was such a big tzaddik, and because he knew, everybody knew that you could rely on what he says in Pesach Halacha, and so therefore, all these people, they were able to become part of Eretz Yisrael society. You know, he wrote thousands of tshuvot, and he called his book Yabia Omer. What is that word, Yabia Omer? You'll see something in a minute you won't believe. Yabia Omer, we say it every Shabbat. We say, Hashamayim Mesaprim Kvoid Kel. The heavens, you look up at the heavens, it shows how great Hashem is. Umase Yodav Magid Rakia. And the sky tells us how great Hashem is. The planets, the sun, the moon, everything works. Yom Liyom, every day. Yabia Omer. We can say expressions of praise. Yabia Omer means that we say expressions of praise. He called his book Yabia Omer. You know why? Yabia is spelled Yud, Beis, Yud, Ayin, backwards. It's Ovadia, Yosef, Ben, Yaakov. That's what I said. Woo. And you know what Omer is B'gematria? You won't believe it. Ovadia, Yosef. You could go crazy from that. It's off by one, but in Gematria you can be off by one. Yabia Omer, Yabia is Ovadia Yosef ben Yaakov, and Omer is B'gematria Ovadia Yosef. Now I'll tell you an amazing thing. What was his real name? The real family name was Ovadia. That's his last name. And I'll tell you something amazing. When he was born, his father Yaakov wanted to name him after the grandfather, whose name was Abdullah. Nobody here is Abdullah. Abdullah Ovadia. That was his name. And he was never killed by an Iraqi mob of Arabs. So this little boy was named Ovadia because there was another Rav also over there. His name was Rabbi Ovadia. And so therefore so he was named after that Rav, and he was named after the grandfather. And he was named Yosef after the Ben Ish Chai, Yosef Chaim. So now his name would have been Ovadia Yosef Ovadia. And he decided when he got older, he didn't want to be called Ovadia Yosef Ovadia. So he dropped the Ovadia and he made Yosef his last name. So that's really his name. Ovadia Yosef was really both names. Those were both first names, but he made that name Yosef his last name, and his family stuck with it. But I'll tell you another thing. He was very grateful to his parents. He loved his parents. Now, his father was not a big Talmid Chacham. His father was a grocer. And you know something? He appreciated that they let him learn, especially his mother. And the first time when he became a rabbi, and a rabbi wears a certain long coat, he didn't put it on until he went to his mother's house. He said, Ma. Oh, he didn't say Ma. He probably said Ima, or whatever, however you say, in Baghdad or in Hebrew. But he said, here, let me show you. And he put on the coat in front of his mother because he knew how much his mother would feel pride. That's what his mother was all about. You know how much he loved his father? You wouldn't believe this. He was a kid when this happened. He was a teenager. He came home from the yeshiva Porat Yosef. He used to learn till late hours at night. And then one night, he came home, it was like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and the door was locked. And he knew his father and mother were sleeping. So if he knocks on the door, he's going to wake them up. So you know what he did? He sat on the step, and he learned all night until his father got up in the morning to go early to Minyan. His father said, what are you doing here? Abba, I didn't want to wake you. Could you imagine that? Now his father was so poor, Yaakov, you won't believe this story. His father was so poor that every morning he would get up, go to the store, and then he would tell Ovadia, he would tell his son, listen, you got to open up the store for me, I'm going to come later. But he really wanted to go to learn, but kibbut avayim, what is he going to do? So one day, you won't believe this, his Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, is standing behind the counter. And the father Yaakov walks into the grocery, he says, Rosh Yeshiva, what are you doing here? He said, I'll tell you the truth. I understand that you want your son to come to help you in the store, but I can't let him do that because he's going to be from the Gedolei Hador. So it's better for me that I should be at your counter and let him learn in the Beis Medrash. Imagine that. The Rosh Yeshiva, could you imagine? Rabbi Babayev, in a drugstore. It's amazing. But that's what Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, because he knew that Ovadia was going to be a big tzaddik. Of course, after that happened, he never asked his son again, to go into the store. But here's something else I want to tell you. He was very against people smoking cigarettes. And one of the tshuvos he wrote, it's very strong. Now, I don't know how many of you smoke. I hope none of you smoke. But if you smoke, you're going to be scared after this. And that's what Ovadia Yosef wanted. You know what Ovadia Yosef said? He said that God gives us a certain amount of years of life. And if somebody smokes, he's taking away from that gift that Hashem gave him. So when he gets up to Shemayim after 120 years, one of the first questions he's going to ask, how did you commit suicide? Whoa, that's a strong question right in the beginning, right? How did you dare smoke? Now, he said in the beginning, he used to think that on Yom Tov you're allowed to smoke, because we know on Yom Tov you're allowed to cook, so it might be ochel nefesh. But then he said, no, it's ochel es hanefesh. That's something, right? Ochel es hanefesh. And you know what he said? He said something amazing. He said, you got to make sure that your kids don't even start to smoke, especially. When do kids start smoking? I once heard a great joke. How come you don't make shechiyano on your first cigarette? You know why? Because it's usually in the bathroom. When does a kid start smoking? On the day of his bar mitzvah, on Purim. And you know what he said? He said an amazing thing. He said, and it's so hard to believe, but I just read it, so there's a pasuk in Mishlei Zayin, pasuk Chavov. It talks about the terrible woman who goes out on the street looking to make trouble, with certain men. Kirabim chalalim hipila, this terrible woman who goes out looking for men. She has many victims. Va'atzumim kol harogeha. And there's a great number of the people who she has killed. He says that's what cigarettes are all about. Rabim chalalim, there are many victims who fall because of cigarettes. They lose so much of their life. It's in Mishlei Zayin, pasuk Chavav. Va'atzumim kol harogeha. And you know what he brings also another pasuk. Uva'achas yiva'aru. Uva'achas yiva'aru v'yichselu. You know what that means? The simple meaning of pasuk in Yirmiyah Yud, pasuk Ches is that those people who try to get us to serve idols, ba'achas, all as one, they're so silly. Ishbar le'yadabar means somebody that's silly. All those who try to get us not to believe in God. But you know how he touched it? You won't believe it. Uva'achas, even one cigarette, yiva'aru, that you light, bar, beer chometz, like it's a fire. Uva'achas, you light up one cigarette, v'yislu, you become silly, you become crazy. And you want to continue, so you shouldn't do it. And you know what somebody wrote? It's unbelievable. The word yiva'aru is equal, begematria, exactly, to the word cigarette, sigaria in Hebrew. Amazing. You burn one cigarette. There's no such thing like eating one of the Cracker Jacks, right? Or Pringles. You ever tried to eat one Pringle? I don't think anybody could eat one Pringle. I know I can't. Why? Because it's addictive. That's the same thing with cigarettes. And he was very, very much against cigarettes. Now, I met him once. Many, many years ago. Some of you know there's a great tzaddik in Eretz Yisrael. His name is Rabbi Yitzchok David Grossman. He started a whole community in Migdal HaEmek, and he called it Migdal Or. And the office started in my home, Baruch Hashem. For many, many years, we were mamish like brothers. And the organization has grown. He has thousands of Talmidim over the years. But I remember when he had the Even Hapinah, when he had the cornerstone. And it was a big thing. Of course, the buildings weren't up yet, and they were going to start. And he invited thousands of people. And Chacham Ovadia Yosef spoke, and he said something absolutely incredible. And he said like this, listen how he gives chizuk. He said, the Pasuk tells us that Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, you cannot go into Eretz Yisrael. But I will let you look at Eretz Yisrael. So the Pasuk tells us, Vayal Moshe, this is Dvarim Lamed Daled Aleph, Vayal Moshe went on top, Me'abreis Moav, on the plains of Moav, Arveis Moav, El Har Nevoy, Roish Apisgon, by the cliff on the summit, the top, and he was able to look. And you know what Chacham Ovadia Yosef said? I never found this medrash, but believe me, if he said it, it's a medrash. The medrash says that every place that Moshe Rabbeinu looked, that's where a place of Torah was built, Mokum Torah was built. So Chacham Ovadia Yosef said to the 5,000 people, all of us tonight, we should feel so proud because we are standing in a place that Moshe Rabbeinu looked at. Because this is going to be a Mokum Torah. Imagine how good everybody feels. this is the place. Moshe Rabbeinu looked at this place where we are. And we can feel so proud because we're all going to give money and all going to build this beautiful Migdal Or. And of course it was a great, and it is still today, a great Mokum Torah. I want to tell you another thing, an amazing story. You know, he wrote many books. Over 50 books he wrote in his life. Yabia Omer was Chuvot. And he wrote books called Yechave Da'as. Yechave Da'as means also expressing wisdom. And I know why he called it Yechave Da'as. Because if you take a look at the Pesach, it says, Yom Yom Yabia Omer V'layla L'layla Yechave Da'as. It's in the same Pesach. And you know what Yechave Da'as was? You wouldn't believe. One night a week he was on the radio, and anybody could call him and ask him any question they wanted. Any question you wanted. And he would give you not 10, not 20, but 30 sources. I took a look at Yabia Omer. In the introduction on the first page, there must be 40 sources. Gemarot, Yeshalmi, Posukim, Medrash, Chumash. It's unbelievable. All the great tzaddikim who first got to know him, Rav Shlomo Zalman, the Shabina Rav, the Brisker Rav, they were crazy. They couldn't believe, how could this young guy know so much? And he's quoting it with the words. As on the radio, he would quote. It's unbelievable. Now, this is the background to this story. There's a wonderful speaker. His name is Rabbi Yosef Ezrahi. And he gave a long hesped, over an hour, about Chacham Ovadia Yosef. And he tells this story. That he was involved with a college campus, and there were a lot of young kids, Israelis, that were not religious. And he would invite them for Shabbat. And slowly but surely, never speaking about religion, just inviting them for Shabbat with the zemirot and the food and the family, most of them became religious. There was one girl, no matter what he tried to do with this girl, she was an academician, she was not going to be religious. And he was working on her, inviting her for Shabbat. And one day, he happens to quote, as he's talking on the parasha, he happens to quote Chacham Ovadia Yosef. And she says, "You quote him? He's your hero? No wonder I don't believe anything you say." He says, "What's wrong with Chacham Ovadia Yosef?" She says, "The Israeli press, they're always criticizing him." He says, "I want to show you something." He says, "Turn around. You see over here, there's a lot of books here. They're called Yechave Da'as. These are a transcription. That means it's written down what he said on the radio." He said, "Take out any book you want, any book. I want to show you something." She says, "Any book?" "Any book you want." She pulls one off the shelf. He says, "Open up to any page." She opens up to the page, and on that page, this is what Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was asked on a radio show. He was asked like this. It was after Sadat had come to Israel, and now there were religious newspaper reporters who wanted to know, are you allowed to go to Egypt? Because now they were reporting that there was going to be peace between Egypt and Israel. And the Pasuk says in Shemois Yudalad Yud Gimel, Vayem Moshe Elohim, Moshe said to the nation, Al tiro, don't be afraid, Hisyatzvu, stay right here by the Yamsuf, Uru'u es Yeshuas Hashem, Asher Yasa Lechem Hayom, you'll see the great help that Hashem's going to do. Ki atem re'isem es Mitzrayim Hayom, you're going to see today the Egyptians, Lo yisasifu l'roisam ad olam, you're never going to see them again. So many people hold that the Torah is telling you can't go to Egypt. The Pesach says you're never going to see them again. So this newspaper reporter, the religious guy, was calling on the radio, and he's asking Chacham Ovadia Yosef if you're allowed to go to Egypt. So this Rabbi Yosef Ezrahi says to this girl, this was on the radio. He had no books with him. This is a transcription of what he said. Count the sources. Just count. This Gemara, this Medrash, this Pasuk, this Yerushalmi, this Bavli. On the first page, there were over 30 sources. He says, turn the next page. This is 4 pages long. This Tshuva, which he rattled off by heart, because this is the transcription. Rabbi Yosef Ezrahi said, the girl's face turned red. She said, Ani kol kach mizbayeshet. I am so embarrassed. This is not a human being. How could anybody remember all that? Now, I don't know, Rabbi Yosef Ezrahi doesn't say whether she became religious or not, I don't know. But one thing is for sure, she got to understand who Rabbi Chacham Ovadia Yosef was all about. As a child, he was a genius. Everybody knew that he was going to be a big tzaddik. I told you that story with Rabbi Ezra Atiyah, who went to the grocery store. But as he got older, his eyes were getting bad. That's why he wore those sunglasses. And there's a remarkable story. When he realized that he was beginning to go blind, he went to the kever of the Beis Yosef, and he cried, and he said to the Beis Yosef, his children were there with him. He said, Maran Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, you know what I have done for you. I have established that your laws are the laws now for all Sfardim in Eretz Yisrael. Please intervene for me in Shamayim, please. I won't be able to learn Torah if I'm blind. And he went away from the kever, he was crying. And when he came home, he put on the sunglasses. And from that moment on, his eyes never deteriorated any less than they were. That's what his children said. He went to the kever of the Beis Yosef and he asked the Beis Yosef to intervene for him. Now here's an adorable story. This is amazing. How he almost lost his shidduch. Now he had a very close relationship with his wife Margalit. But you know, when they got engaged, his father-in-law was so happy because he saw he's got the tzaddik ador. He's a young man, but he knew. Now his father-in-law was a Avram Patal, who was a great Mekubal and a great tzaddik, a great Talmid Chacham. He went to the kotel together with his future son-in-law, and he was crying, thanking Hashem that Hashem gave him this big, great jewel. Now, Rabbi Avram Patal was not wealthy, and this girl, who was the daughter of a great tzaddik, could have married the wealthiest boy, but she only wanted Ovadia. Now this Avram Patal, he was so in love with his son-in-law. He said, please come every night so we could talk and learning. He said, I cannot come every night. I'll come once a week. Okay. He came once a week, and Margalit was sitting on the side, and Ovadia didn't look at her often. He just, big tzaddik, and he just was talking to his future father-in-law. He comes week after week after week. One week he comes, Margalit is not there. He says to the father, where's Margalit? He says, I feel terrible, but I want to tell you, she wants to break the shidduch. Break the shidduch? Why does she want to break the shidduch? He says, because every time you come, you're only talking to me, you don't look at her. He said, okay, where is she? She's in the other room. Okay, let me go. He's there for 10 minutes. Nobody knows. He never told anybody what he told her. But they both came out smiling, and they lived happily ever after. I'll tell you 2 more stories, and that will end. Once he had to have an operation, a heart operation. He had a weak heart. And it was emergency. And they told him the operation is going to take 3 hours. And he said, I can't go yet. They said, what do you mean? His son said, what do you mean you can't go? They're waiting for you. Everything is set. You got to have the operation. He said, no, you're going to have to wait. So why do I have to wait? He said, it's a serious operation, right? Yeah, sure. They're worried, right? That I might not even make it off the table, right? Yeah, you're right. You got to have it right away. He said, listen, I'm in the middle of writing a tshuva. There's a woman who cannot get married. She's an aguna. And I have to write this tshuva because if I don't get off that table, she'll never be able to get married. So I'm going to finish that tshuva, and then you take me to the hospital. That's what it's all about. So we have learned a lot of things tonight. We have learned about his love for Torah, his learning the Torah, making sure that our children and the children of our friends come to learn Torah. We have learned about his Avas Yisrael, how he cared for the Agunot after the Yom Kippur War, how he cared for the Ethiopian Jews. We have learned that he would go up and down, speak to anybody, make jokes, tell stories, just be light, just be nice to people. Never to yell, Dracher Darki Noam. That's what it's all about. We learned that he was against cigarette smoking. That's very important. We know that every place in Eretz Yisrael that's a Mokum Torah, that's where Moshe Rabbeinu set his eyes. And we know that he was a great Talmid Chacham who had an unbelievable mind and who would review over and over and over. Now the men will be able to look up tonight in Bava Kama, Daf, Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. There are 2 lines on that Daf, page 77a in your art scroll. You take a look. There's a Tosfos, that's one of the commentaries that's, maybe 50 or 60 lines. And one time somebody asked Rabbi Ovadia about the Tosfos, and he recited the whole thing by heart. He said, how could you possibly know that by heart? He said, I reviewed it 200 times. Imagine that, 200 times. That's what Chazara, review, is all about. That's how you get a good memory. So I just want to end with this beautiful story. And this is very touching to me and very moving to me, and I'll tell you why. Next week, a new Maggid book is coming out. Some of you know that I've written a number of books on Jewish short stories. And next week, a book is coming out by Art Scroll. It's called The Maggid at the Podium. Podium is a place like this from where you speak. And it has 25 of my speeches. And I had to write an introduction. You always write an introduction. Even though your introduction is at the front of the book, you always write at the introduction when you're finished writing the book. It's the last thing you write, but it's the first thing people read. And in there, I wrote a question. What's more important, the written word or the spoken word? What's more powerful, a speech or a book? And I had a whole discussion, and I came out with something, and I could not believe it. There's a new book coming out on Rabbi Chacham Ovadia Yosef. It's written by a dear friend of mine. His name is Rabbi Yehuda Azulai. And he writes this story, which I saw in other books, but I was happy that he wrote it because he had the greatest title for this story, as you'll see in a moment. The story is that one night, Chacham Ovadia Yosef was thinking to himself, I got to stop this public speaking. It's impossible. Every night I'm out speaking. And I want to write my books. I want to write my tshuvot. And I don't know what to do because the more I go out and speak, the less I can write. He said he went to sleep that night and he had a dream. And he dreamt that the Ben Ish Chai, the one who he got the name Yosef from, because the Ben Ish Chai was Yosef Chaim, comes to him in a dream. And he comes into his house. And he walks over to the desk of Chacham Ovadia Yosef in the dream, and he takes a look at what he's writing. So very good. Very good. So Chacham Ovadia Yosef in the dream says to him, I am so proud that you like what I'm writing. But you know what I feel like? I feel like the pasuk in Shir HaShirim. In Shir HaShirim it says, in Shir HaShirim, Aleph Pasuk Vav, Samuni noiteira es hakramim. They have put me as a keeper of the vineyards. However, Karmi Shalid Loy Notarti, my own vineyard, I can't watch because I have no time. I'm helping everybody else. But what about me? What about my books? And you know what the Ben Ish Chai told him in the dream? He said, let me tell you something. Everyone knows that Sefarim are important. We need Sefarim. Without the Sefarim, we wouldn't know anything about the previous generations. It's only because we have all the great books of the Rambam, the Beis Yosef, the Ramah, everything. The Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara, the Chumash. We have to have the Sefarim. But you know what's even more important for the moment? When you give a powerful speech, when you inspire people, and people walk away and say, something? We got to change. We got to grow. We're good, but we got to be better. And he said, that's what you got to do. You got to keep on speaking. And you know what Rabbi Azulai calls this story? Yosef's dream. I love the title. And that's what we're doing here tonight. And I don't know if I should tell you this, but my middle name is Yosef. See, Rabbi Richter over there knows me as Pesach, but that's my middle name, Pesach Yosef. And that's why we came here tonight. Oh yeah, that's you. Very nice. Okay. How many Yosefs we got here tonight? Okay. But anyway, so name all your kids Yosef and I'll be the Moel and everybody will be happy. But anyway, but the idea is that we should continue. That's what we came here tonight for. We come tonight to listen, to be inspired, to take home. And just as we're going to grow, Chacham Ovadia Yosef is going to grow. His neshama will go higher and higher and higher. Anytime from now on you do a mitzvah on something that we spoke about, whether you do something in Avas HaTorah, Avas Yisrael, Avas Hashem, and you think we're doing it because we heard something tonight about Chacham Ovadia Yosef, his neshama will go higher. Hashem should bless each and every one of us on this night of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, that we should be able to grow. Our neshamot should grow, and the neshamot of Chacham Ovadia Yosef should grow, and then we should all meet together with Tchias HaMeisim, and Mashiach should come in our day. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, another 10 minutes of time with the permission of